The gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Aztec, New Mexico territory, causing Stella Vallens to duck instinctively behind an overturned water trough. Her heart pounded against her rib cage as the saloon doors behind her swung violently on their hinges. A dead man's promise had led her here, but she hadn't expected to arrive amid a shootout. The year was 1881, and the Southwest Territories remained as wild and untamed as the men who sought their fortunes here. Stella's burgundy traveling dress, once pristine when she'd stepped off the stagecoach just hours earlier, now bore the dust and grime of the street where she'd thrown herself for cover. "Stay down, madam," a deep voice commanded as a tall figure moved swiftly beside her, the silver star pinned to his leather vest catching the harsh midday sun. Another shot rang out, splintering wood just inches from where they crouched. The lawman returned fire with practiced precision, his movements calm despite the danger. "I had this handled," Stella muttered, revealing the small derringer clutched in her gloved hand. The man spared her a quick glance, taking in her determined expression and the weapon with raised eyebrows. "Course you did," he replied with the faintest hint of amusement before turning his attention back to the shooter. When the exchange of gunfire finally ceased, the lawman stood cautiously, keeping his body positioned to shield her. "Marshal Dawson Calloway," he introduced himself, holstering his Colt. "Welcome to Aztec, though I reckon this wasn't the greeting you were expecting." Stella rose to her feet, brushing dust from her skirts. "Stella Vallens, and no, though I've learned to expect the unexpected in these parts." Dawson studied her with interest. Standing before him was not the typical Eastern woman who occasionally ventured west. There was a hardness in her green eyes that spoke of experiences beyond her apparent 25 years, and a confidence in the way she handled herself that piqued his curiosity. "You've got business in Aztec?" he asked, guiding her away from the growing crowd that had emerged once the danger passed. "I've inherited property here," she answered, her tone suggesting she wasn't inclined to elaborate. "The Sundown Ranch. I'm told it's about 5 miles outside town." Recognition flashed across Dawson's face. "Old Jeb Valens' place, my uncle," she confirmed. "Though I haven't seen him since I was a child. His letter and deed arrived 3 weeks ago along with news of his passing." Dawson nodded slowly. "The Sundown's been sitting empty since Jeb died. It's good land, but it needs work, and it's got complications." "What kind of complications?" Stella asked sharply. "The kind that might explain why someone just tried to put a bullet in the back of Willis Tanner over a game of cards," Dawson replied. "Water rights, boundary disputes. The usual troubles that plague ranchers in these parts." Stella sighed, tucking her derringer back into her reticule. "I'm familiar with such troubles, Marshal. Call me Dawson," he offered. "Everyone does. And if you're planning to stay and work that ranch, you'll need help." "I've managed on my own for some time now," she replied coolly. Dawson took in the stubborn set of her jaw and the determined look in her eyes. Something told him Stella Vallens wasn't one to back down easily, regardless of the obstacles. That quality might serve her well in Aztec or get her killed. "At least let me escort you to your property," he suggested. "There's a storm brewing from the south, and the road can be treacherous if you don't know it." Stella hesitated, weighing her desire for independence against practical considerations. "I have supplies to collect first," she finally conceded. "The stagecoach driver stored my trunks at the depot. We can stop there on our way out," Dawson offered, gesturing toward a building down the street. "My office is there if you'd like to wait while I deal with this mess." He nodded toward the saloon where the attempted shooting had occurred. "I'll accompany you," Stella stated firmly. "I'd like to understand what I'm walking into." Dawson's lips twitched with the hint of a smile. Suit yourself, Miss Vallens. But I should warn you, Aztec ain't like San Francisco or Chicago. Things operate differently here. I'm aware of how things operate in territories like this, Marshal, she replied, matching his stride as they walked toward the saloon. I've spent the last 3 years in Silver City. This revelation caused Dawson to reassess the woman beside him. Silver City had its own rough reputation, especially after the Lincoln County War had spilled over into those parts. Inside the saloon, a red-faced man was being restrained by 2 others. Blood trickled from a cut above his eye, but he appeared otherwise unharmed. The shooter had evidently been subdued. A young man sat sullenly in a chair, his hands bound behind him. He drew first, Marshal. The young man protested. I was defending myself. That's not how the witnesses tell it, Taylor, Dawson responded, his voice carrying natural authority. You pulled when his back was turned. Stella observed the scene with clinical detachment, noting the nervous glances cast her way by several of the men. Women weren't typically present for the aftermath of saloon violence. This the woman who just arrived on the noon stage. A portly man with an impressive mustache approached, eyeing Stella with undisguised curiosity. Mayor Wilkins, Dawson acknowledged. This is Miss Stella Vallens, Jebediah's niece. She's come to claim the Sundown. A ripple of murmurs spread through the saloon at this announcement. The mayor's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. Miss Vallens, welcome to Aztec, Mayor Wilkins said, though his tone lacked warmth. I wasn't aware Jeb had any living relatives. He had one, Stella replied simply. The town council might have an interest in discussing the future of that property, Wilkins continued. There's been talk of expanding the settlement eastward, and the Sundown sits on valuable. The deed is in my name, Mayor Wilkins, Stella interrupted, her voice calm but unyielding. I don't intend to sell. Dawson watched the exchange with interest. Few people interrupted Wilkins, who had governed Aztec with an iron grip for nearly a decade. Of course, the mayor backpedaled. Just making conversation. We'll have plenty of time to get acquainted now that you're a resident. He tipped his hat and retreated to the bar. Dawson handled the aftermath efficiently, arranging for the would-be shooter to be locked up until a circuit judge arrived. As they left the saloon, he glanced at Stella with newfound respect. You handled Wilkins better than most newcomers, he commented. He's used to getting his way. Men like him exist in every town, Stella replied. They only respect strength. At the depot, Dawson helped load Stella's trunks into his wagon. The station master eyed them with interest. Heard you're taking over the Sundown, the man said to Stella as he handed over the last of her belongings. Brave woman. After what happened to Jeb, what did happen to my uncle? Stella asked sharply. The letter she'd received had mentioned only that he'd passed suddenly. The station master exchanged a look with Dawson, who subtly shook his head. Heart trouble, they say, the station master replied, though his eyes didn't meet hers. Terrible shame. As they drove away from town, storm clouds gathering on the horizon, Stella broke the silence. My uncle didn't die of natural causes, did he? Dawson's hands tightened on the reins. What makes you say that? I've become quite good at detecting when I'm being lied to, she said. The station master wasn't telling the truth. Dawson considered his words carefully. There were circumstances around your uncle's death that raised questions. Nothing I could prove. I appreciate honesty, Marshal, Stella said. I'd rather know what I'm facing. Your uncle was found at the bottom of a ravine on his property, Dawson explained. His horse was nearby, also dead. The assumption was that the horse spooked and they both went over the edge during a night ride. But you don't believe that, Stella stated rather than asked. Jeb Vallens rode better than any man I've known, and that horse of his was steady as they come, Dawson replied. And there were other matters, boundary disputes with neighboring ranchers, particularly the Diamond T, owned by Thaddeus Tucker. Tucker's been trying to buy the Sundown for years. Stella absorbed this information silently as they continued along the rutted road. The first fat raindrops began to fall as they crested a hill, revealing a valley spread out below them. "There it is," Dawson said, pointing to a distant collection of buildings nestled against the backdrop of rust-colored mesas. The Sundown. Stella's breath caught as she took in her inheritance. The main house was larger than she'd expected, a sprawling single-story structure with a wide porch wrapping around two sides. Several outbuildings, including a barn and what appeared to be bunkhouses, were arranged in a loose semicircle. Even from this distance, she could see that repairs were needed. A portion of the barn roof had collapsed, and the corral fencing was broken in places. Yet there was something about the property that called to her, a sense of belonging she hadn't felt since her parents had died 10 years earlier, leaving her to navigate the world alone at 18. "It's beautiful," she said softly. As they approached the ranch, the rain began in earnest, forcing them to make a dash for the porch once Dawson had brought the wagon to a stop. Stella stood for a moment under the shelter of the roof, gazing out at her property while water streamed from the eaves. "You'll need help getting it back in working order," Dawson said, bringing her trunks up from the wagon. "Jeb had a few hands, but they moved on after he died. Can't run cattle without workers." "I'll manage," Stella insisted, though even she heard the uncertainty in her voice. She'd worked on ranches before, but never run one herself. Dawson produced a key from his pocket. "Jeb gave me this for safekeeping before he died. Said someone might come for the place one day." He handed it to her. "He must have meant you." Stella took the key, feeling its weight in her palm, the weight of responsibility, of a new beginning, and perhaps of danger. She unlocked the door and stepped inside her new home. The interior was dusty but well-maintained. Heavy wooden furniture filled the main room, and a stone fireplace dominated one wall. Faded curtains hung at the windows, and a bearskin rug covered part of the plank floor. "I'll get a fire going," Dawson offered, moving to the hearth. "Storm might keep us here a while." Stella nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. She was alone in a remote ranch with a virtual stranger, in a town where someone might have murdered her uncle, and where powerful interests apparently coveted her land. "Why are you helping me, Marshal?" she asked abruptly. Dawson paused in the act of stacking kindling. "I respected your uncle, and I believe in the law." "The law doesn't always protect those who need it most," Stella said, a bitter edge to her voice. "That's why it needs people willing to stand for it," Dawson replied, striking a match. The kindling caught quickly, orange flames licking at the larger logs he'd arranged. Stella shrugged out of her damp traveling coat and hung it near the fire. "I've found I can only rely on myself." Dawson stood, brushing his hands on his trousers. "That's a lonely way to live, Miss Vallens." "Perhaps," she acknowledged, "but it's safer." As the storm intensified outside, they settled into an uneasy companionship. Stella explored the house, finding it had 3 bedrooms, a kitchen with an iron stove, and a small study filled with her uncle's books and papers. Dawson made himself useful by checking that the roof wasn't leaking and securing the shutters against the wind. In the kitchen, Stella discovered that someone, perhaps Dawson himself, had left basic provisions: flour, coffee, beans, and salted pork. She set about preparing a simple meal, finding comfort in the familiar routine. "You cook as well as you handle a derringer," Dawson commented as they sat at the sturdy oak table, eating the stew she'd prepared. "Necessary skills for a woman on her own," Stella replied. though I'll admit I'm better with a rifle than that little pistol." Dawson's eyebrows rose. "You're full of surprises, Miss Vallens." "Most women are, Marshal. Men just rarely take the time to notice." A comfortable silence fell between them as they ate. When they'd finished, Dawson helped clear the dishes, then stood awkwardly by the door. "I should head back to town," he said, though the rain still pounded against the roof. "Don't be foolish," Stella said pragmatically. "You drown before you reach the main road. There's a spare bedroom." "You can leave at first light." Dawson hesitated, clearly concerned about propriety. "People will talk." "People always talk," Stella replied with a dismissive wave of her hand. "I stopped caring about such things long ago." They settled in the main room, the fire casting dancing shadows across the walls. Dawson produced a bottle of whiskey from his saddlebag. "Your uncle's favorite," he explained, pouring 2 small glasses. "Seemed fitting to toast his memory here." Stella accepted the glass, studying the amber liquid. "Tell me about him. I barely remember him from childhood." Dawson leaned back in his chair, considering. Jeb was forthright, never shied from speaking his mind or standing his ground. "Came here 15 years ago with nothing but determination and built this place up through sheer grit. Wasn't always easy to get along with, but he was fair. Treated his workers well." "Why did he leave me the ranch?" Stella asked, the question that had been nagging at her since receiving the deed. "We hadn't communicated in years." "He kept track of you," Dawson revealed. "Had newspaper clippings about your father's death, letters from someone who'd seen you in Silver City. He spoke of you sometimes, though never explained why you were estranged." This revelation stunned Stella. She'd believed herself forgotten by her father's older brother after a bitter family dispute had separated them years ago. "I never thought he cared," she said softly. "I reckon there's a lot about Jeb you didn't know," Dawson replied. "Maybe this place is his way of making amends." They talked into the night, the whiskey loosening their tongues. Dawson spoke of his 5 years as marshal in Aztec, his time as an army scout before that, and his belief in bringing law to the frontier. Stella, typically guarded, found herself sharing stories of her time in Silver City, where she'd worked as a bookkeeper at a mining company after her husband's death had left her destitute. "You were married?" Dawson asked, surprised. "Briefly," Stella confirmed, her expression hardening. "Thomas seemed like a good man when I met him. Turned out he was better at gambling away our money and using his fists when I questioned him." Dawson's face darkened. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. He died in a card game dispute 3 years ago. I consider it justice served." The bluntness of her statement hung in the air between them. "Is that why you said you're not a saint?" Dawson asked quietly. "Because you don't mourn him?" Stella's eyes snapped to his, startled by his perception. "That and other things. I've done what I needed to survive." "Not all of it would meet with social approval." Dawson nodded slowly. "I'm no saint either. The law I uphold isn't always just, and I've made compromises I'm not proud of." "We all have," Stella said, draining her glass. "The difference is I don't pretend otherwise." Outside, the storm began to abate, the drumming of rain on the roof softening to a gentle patter. Stella stood, suddenly aware of the late hour and the intimacy that had developed between them. "I should turn in," she said, gathering her composure. "Tomorrow brings much work." Dawson rose as well. "I'll help you get started before I head back to town. The least I can do is make sure you're properly settled." "I don't need charity, Marshal." "It's not charity, Miss Vallens. It's being neighborly." Stella relented with a nod. "Good night, then." "Good night," he replied, watching as she disappeared down the hallway to what had been her uncle's room. Morning brought clear skies and the opportunity for Stella to truly see her inheritance in daylight. The ranch sprawled across approximately 500 acres, with a creek running through the eastern section. The land had potential, but it was clear that it had been neglected in the months since her uncle's death. Dawson proved his worth by helping her assess immediate needs: the barn roof, the broken corral fencing, the well pump that needed repair. He showed her the boundaries of the property, pointing out where it adjoined the massive Diamond T Ranch. "Tucker will push," Dawson warned as they stood on a ridge overlooking both properties. "He wants to control the water rights to this whole valley." "Then Mr. Tucker will be disappointed," Stella replied firmly. They returned to the house to find visitors waiting: 3 men on horseback, one of whom dismounted as they approached. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, with a weathered face and cold eyes. "This must be Jebediah's mysterious niece," the man said, his voice carrying across the yard. "Thaddeus Tucker, madam. I own the Diamond T." He gestured to the land beyond her borders. "Mr. Tucker," Stella acknowledged with a curt nod. "I'd say it's a pleasure, but I make it a policy not to lie before noon." Tucker's expression hardened momentarily before he forced a laugh. "Spirited, just like your uncle. I can see the family resemblance." Dawson positioned himself slightly in front of Stella, his stance casual but his hand resting near his holster. "What brings you by, Tucker?" "Neighborly courtesy," Tucker replied smoothly. "Thought I'd introduce myself and extend an offer." He turned his attention back to Stella. "Miss Vallens, I'd like to purchase your property. I'll pay fair market value plus 20%. "The Sundown isn't for sale," Stella replied without hesitation. Tucker's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You might want to consider it. Ranching isn't easy work, especially for a woman alone. This land needs attention it hasn't gotten since Jeb's unfortunate accident." The emphasis he placed on the word accident sent a chill down Stella's spine. "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Tucker," she said evenly. "And I'm not alone. I'll be hiring hands." Tucker's gaze flicked to Dawson. "Putting down roots, Marshal. That's not like you." "Just being neighborly," Dawson replied, echoing his words from the previous night. "Well," Tucker said, replacing his hat, "my offer stands. When you change your mind, you know where to find me." He mounted his horse with the ease of a lifelong rider. "A word of caution, though. This territory can be dangerous for those who don't understand how things work." With that thinly veiled threat hanging in the air, Tucker and his men rode away. "Charming neighbor," Stella remarked dryly. "That was a warning," Dawson said, his expression grave. "Tucker doesn't like being denied what he wants." "Neither do I," Stella replied. Over the next few weeks, Stella threw herself into restoring the Sundown. With Dawson's help, she hired 3 experienced ranch hands, brothers Jose and Miguel Ramirez, who had worked for her uncle previously, and a younger man named Charlie Watson who had a gift with horses. The work was backbreaking, but Stella worked alongside her men from dawn to dusk, repairing fences, mending the barn roof, and tending to the small herd of cattle that had survived her uncle's absence. Each night, she fell into bed exhausted but satisfied with the progress they were making. Dawson visited frequently, ostensibly to check on her safety, though Stella suspected his interest had become more personal. She found herself looking forward to his visits, appreciating his quiet strength and unwavering support. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mesas in shades of gold and crimson, Dawson broached the subject that had been hanging between them. "People in town are talking," he said, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "About you and me." Stella continued to gaze at the horizon. "Let them talk. It could damage your reputation." This earned a short laugh from Stella. "My reputation? Marshal, I'm a widow running a ranch alone in territory where women are expected to be wives or saloon girls. My reputation was in tatters the moment I arrived. You know what I mean," Dawson persisted. "They're saying I'm sweet on you." Now Stella turned to look at him, her expression unreadable in the fading light. "And are you?" Dawson set his cup down deliberately. "I think you know the answer to that. Say it anyway," she challenged. "I admire you, Stella," he said, using her given name for the first time. "Your strength, your determination, the way you face challenges head-on. And yes, I find myself thinking about you more than is probably wise for a lawman who should remain impartial." Stella felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through her chest. Since Thomas's death, she'd closed herself off to the possibility of romantic attachment, viewing it as a weakness she couldn't afford. "I'm not an easy woman to care for, Dawson," she warned. "I've built walls for good reason." "I'm not asking you to tear them down," he replied. "Just maybe consider adding a gate." The metaphor made her smile despite herself. "I'll take it under advisement." Their moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Dawson was on his feet instantly, hand moving to his gun, but he relaxed when he recognized Miguel Ramirez returning from checking the north pasture. The ranch hand dismounted quickly, his expression urgent. "Miss Vallens, someone's cut the fence along the creek boundary." 20 head of cattle are missing. Dawson's face hardened. "Tucker." "We can't prove that," Stella cautioned, though she suspected he was right. "Let me ride out there," Dawson said. "If the tracks lead to Diamond T land, I can confront him officially." "And if they don't?" Stella asked. "Tucker isn't fool enough to leave such obvious evidence." "Then we rebuild the fence stronger than before," Dawson replied. "And I'll start keeping a closer eye on your boundaries." Over the following days, the harassment escalated. A mysterious fire broke out in the western pasture, threatening to spread to the ranch buildings before it was contained. The well was found contaminated one morning, forcing Stella and her hands to haul water from the creek. A shipment of supplies she'd ordered from Santa Fe was misdirected and never arrived. Through it all, Stella refused to bend. She hired more men, including 2 Navajo brothers with excellent tracking skills who could patrol the boundaries. She purchased replacement supplies at inflated prices from Aztec merchants, who seemed increasingly reluctant to do business with her. Word spread about the standoff between Stella Vallens and Thaddeus Tucker. Some admired her refusal to be bullied. Others thought her foolish for antagonizing the most powerful man in the county. Dawson did what he could within the constraints of his position, but without concrete evidence of Tucker's involvement, his hands were largely tied. His frustration was evident during his visits, which had become nearly daily occurrences. "You're exhausting yourself," he observed one evening as Stella struggled to keep her eyes open over dinner. "This can't continue." "It won't," she agreed. "Something has to give." "Sell him the ranch," Dawson suggested, not for the first time. "Take the money and start fresh somewhere else, somewhere safer." Stella's eyes flashed with sudden anger. "Run, you mean? Let him win through intimidation what he couldn't get legitimately? No, this land is mine. I've put my sweat and blood into it, just as my uncle did." "Your life is worth more than property," Dawson argued. "It's not about the property," Stella shot back. "It's about justice, about not letting men like Tucker dictate the world through fear and violence." Dawson sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I understand principles, Stella, but I also understand that Tucker won't stop until he gets what he wants, and I—" He hesitated, then plunged ahead. "I couldn't bear it if something happened to you." The raw emotion in his voice penetrated her fatigue. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "Nothing will happen to me," she assured him with more confidence than she felt. "I've survived worse than Thaddeus Tucker." The next morning brought a new challenge. As Stella rode out to check on a new calf born the previous day, she noticed a rider approaching from the direction of town. It wasn't Dawson or any of her hands, and wariness immediately set her on edge. As the rider drew closer, she recognized Mayor Wilkins, looking decidedly uncomfortable on horseback. She reined in her mount and waited for him to reach her. "Miss Vallens," he greeted her, mopping his brow with a handkerchief. "I've come on official town business. What can I do for you, Mayor?" she asked coolly. Wilkins produced an official-looking document from his coat. "This is a notice from the territorial court regarding water rights along Silver Creek, which runs through your property." Stella took the paper, scanning its contents with growing indignation. "This claims I'm diverting excessive water upstream, depriving other ranchers, specifically the Diamond T, of their rightful share. That's absurd. We've made no alterations to the natural flow." "Nevertheless," Wilkins continued, clearly uncomfortable, "the court has issued a preliminary injunction prohibiting you from using water from the creek until the matter is resolved." "Without water, my cattle will die," Stella pointed out. "This is just another of Tucker's tactics." "The law is the law, Miss Vallens," Wilkins replied, though he couldn't meet her eyes. "A hearing is scheduled for 3 weeks from now in Santa Fe. You can present your case then." After Wilkins departed, Stella sat on her horse for a long time, the injunction clutched in her hand. The legal maneuvering was clever without access to the creek. The Sundown would become virtually worthless within weeks. Tucker was clearly hoping to force her hand before the hearing even took place. She returned to the ranch house to find Dawson waiting for her, his expression grim. "You've heard," she said, noting the tension in his stance. "Wilkins informed me this morning before riding out here," he confirmed. "I tried to talk him out of it, but the papers are in order. Tucker's got a judge in his pocket. What do I do now?" Stella asked, allowing herself a rare moment of vulnerability. Dawson stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "Fight him, in court and here. I'll help however I can." "You've already risked too much for me," Stella protested. "Your position, damn my position if it means I can't stand for what's right," Dawson interrupted, a fierce light in his eyes. "Tucker's gone too far." In the days that followed, Stella and her ranch hands worked frantically to create alternative water sources. They dug a new well closer to the house and constructed a system to collect rainwater. It wouldn't be enough for the cattle long term, but it might buy them time until the hearing. Word of Tucker's legal maneuver spread through Aztec, and to Stella's surprise, support for her cause began to grow. Other small ranchers, long intimidated by Tucker's tactics, saw in her struggle a reflection of their own. They began to visit the Sundown, bringing supplies, offering labor, and sharing their own stories of Tucker's ruthless expansion. As the date of the hearing approached, an unexpected visitor arrived at the Sundown Judge Franklin Pierce, the circuit judge who periodically visited Aztec to handle legal matters. He was an imposing figure, tall and lean with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Miss Vallens," he said as she greeted him on the porch, "I hope you don't mind this unannounced visit. I wanted to see this disputed waterway for myself before the formal hearing." "You're welcome to inspect the entire property, Your Honor," Stella offered, though his presence made her nervous. If Tucker had indeed bought a judge, it might well be this man. Judge Pierce spent several hours examining the creek, the irrigation systems her uncle had established, and the natural flow of water through both the Sundown and neighboring properties. He asked pointed questions but revealed nothing of his own thoughts on the matter. As he prepared to depart, he paused. "Miss Vallens, may I speak frankly?" "Please do," she replied. "You've made a powerful enemy in Thaddeus Tucker," the judge observed. "He has influence that extends well beyond Aztec." "I'm aware of that," Stella acknowledged. "Yet you persist in this fight. Pierce continued. Most would have sold and moved on by now. I'm not most people, Your Honor. The judge studied her for a long moment. No, I don't believe you are. He mounted his horse, then added, I'll see you at the hearing, Miss Vallens. Come prepared. The night before Stella was to depart for Santa Fe, Dawson visited one final time. He brought news that increased the stakes of tomorrow's journey. Tucker's men have been watching the road to Santa Fe, he reported grimly. I believe they plan to ensure you never make it to that hearing. Stella absorbed this information with outward calm, though her heart raced. Then I'll need an escort. Already arranged, Dawson assured her. Jose and Miguel will accompany us along with Charlie. We leave before dawn. Us? Stella raised an eyebrow. Did you think I'd let you face this alone? Dawson asked softly. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of feelings that had grown steadily despite the circumstances. Stella moved toward him, drawn by a force she couldn't explain. Dawson, she began, struggling to articulate the tumult of emotions within her. You don't have to say anything, he said, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face. I do, she insisted. You should know who you're risking everything for. I'm no saint, Dawson. I've done things good, he interrupted, his voice low and intense. I need a real woman, not an angel. Angels don't survive out here. The truth of his words struck her deeply. For so long, she'd seen her hardness as a flaw, something that made her unworthy of genuine connection. Yet here was this man, this strong, principled man, valuing precisely what she'd believed made her unlovable. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home after a long journey. His arms around her provided not just physical shelter but emotional sanctuary she hadn't known she was seeking. They parted reluctantly, both aware of the challenges that still lay ahead. We should rest, Stella said practically, though her body yearned for more. Tomorrow will come early, Dawson nodded, understanding in his eyes. Tomorrow we face Tucker, together. The journey to Santa Fe began in pre-dawn darkness, with Stella and her four-man escort traveling cross-country rather than using the main road. Dawson's foresight proved wise when they spotted a group of riders positioned along the usual route, clearly waiting in ambush. Despite their precautions, trouble found them near midday. As they traversed a narrow canyon, shots rang out from the ridge above. Bullets kicked up dust around their horses, causing the animals to rear and whinny in panic. Take cover. Dawson shouted, drawing his weapon as he guided his horse behind a boulder. The others followed suit, dismounting to present smaller targets. Miguel took a bullet to the shoulder before he could reach safety, crying out in pain as he stumbled to the ground. Charlie pulled him to shelter while Jose returned fire. How many? Stella asked, her own rifle at the ready. She'd changed from a riding skirt to men's trousers for the journey, allowing her greater mobility. At least 4, Dawson estimated, peering cautiously around the edge of their cover. Tucker's men, no doubt. They're trying to delay us, Stella realized. The hearing is tomorrow morning. If we're not there, Tucker wins by default. We're not letting that happen, Dawson assured her. The standoff continued for nearly an hour, with occasional exchanges of gunfire preventing either side from moving. Miguel's wound had been bandaged, but he was in no condition to ride far. We need a diversion, Dawson finally said, checking his ammunition. I'll draw their fire. The rest of you make a break for it. That's suicide, Stella protested. I'll circle back and meet you in Santa Fe, Dawson replied, though they both knew the odds were against him. No, Stella's tone brooked no argument. I have a better idea. Her plan was audacious, but had the advantage of surprise. Using Charlie's skills with horses, they created the impression that their entire party was retreating down the canyon. Meanwhile, Stella and Dawson climbed the steep canyon wall at a different point, working their way around to flank their attackers. The gambit worked. When they reached the ridge, they found Tucker's men focused on the canyon below, unaware of the threat behind them. Dawson's commanding voice ordering them to drop their weapons came as a complete shock. Two of the men surrendered immediately. A third reached for his gun and took a bullet from Stella's rifle for his trouble, a clean shot through the shoulder that knocked him to the ground. The fourth man managed to escape on horseback, likely heading back to warn Tucker. With their ambushers subdued, the journey to Santa Fe resumed. They arrived late that evening, exhausted but triumphant. Miguel was taken to a doctor, while Dawson delivered the captured men to the territorial marshal's office. "These men attacked us on the road from Aztec," he explained to his counterpart. "They work for Thaddeus Tucker." The Santa Fe marshal, a grizzled veteran named Harmon, frowned. "Serious accusation against a prominent citizen, Calloway. One I can prove," Dawson replied firmly. "They were trying to prevent Miss Vallens from attending tomorrow's water rights hearing." Harmon's eyebrows rose. "The Sundown case. That explains a few things." Judge Pierce was asking questions about Tucker earlier today. This information gave Stella hope as she prepared for the hearing. If the judge was already investigating Tucker, perhaps he wasn't as firmly in the rancher's pocket as they'd feared. The territorial courthouse was an imposing adobe structure in the Spanish style. As Stella entered the next morning, dressed in her finest riding habit, she was surprised by the number of people who had gathered. News of the ambush had spread, adding drama to an already contentious case. Tucker sat at the front of the room with his lawyer, a slick-looking man in an Eastern suit. He turned to smirk at Stella as she walked past, his confidence undiminished. Judge Pierce entered, and the proceedings began. Tucker's lawyer presented his case first, arguing with practiced eloquence that the Sundown Ranch was diverting excessive water upstream, violating long-standing water rights agreements. When it was Stella's turn, she approached the bench without a lawyer. She had no money for such luxuries, and besides, she believed the truth should speak for itself. "Your Honor," she began, "the allegations against me are false. As you saw during your visit to my property, the Sundown uses only its fair share of water from Silver Creek. What Mr. Tucker truly wants is not justice but my land." She proceeded to outline Tucker's campaign of intimidation, from cattle rustling to the contamination of her well. When she described the previous day's ambush, murmurs ran through the courtroom. Tucker's lawyer jumped to his feet. "Objection. These unsubstantiated accusations have nothing to do with water rights. On the contrary," Judge Pierce replied calmly, "they speak to motive and credibility. Continue, Miss Vallens." Stella presented documents her uncle had kept records of water usage, maps of the original property boundaries, and correspondence with territorial officials confirming the Sundown's water rights. She spoke with clarity and conviction, her natural intelligence evident in her well-structured arguments. When she finished, Tucker's lawyer called his client to testify. Tucker repeated his claims about water diversion, his manner smooth and practiced. During cross-examination, Stella asked, "Mr. Tucker, is it not true that you've attempted to purchase my property multiple times?" "I've made fair offers," Tucker acknowledged. "And when I refused, you decided to take it by other means," Stella suggested. Tucker's face darkened. "That's a damnable lie." "Is it?" Stella produced a final piece of evidence, a letter she'd found among her uncle's papers. "This is correspondence between you and my uncle, dated 3 weeks before his death. In it, you threaten to take measures if he continues to refuse your offers." "Can you explain what measures you meant, Mr. Tucker?" The rancher's composure cracked. That letter proves nothing. Perhaps not by itself, Judge Pierce interjected, but combined with the testimony of your former employees. He gestured to where Dawson stood with one of the captured ambushers, who had agreed to testify in exchange for leniency. It paints a troubling picture. The hearing continued through the afternoon, with witnesses from both sides presenting testimony. By the time Judge Pierce called for a recess to consider his decision, Stella was exhausted but hopeful. She had presented her case as best she could. Dawson found her sitting alone on a bench outside the courthouse, her eyes closed as she gathered her strength. "You were magnificent in there," he said, taking a seat beside her. "I only spoke the truth," Stella replied, opening her eyes to look at him. "Whether it's enough remains to be seen." "Regardless of the outcome," Dawson said, taking her hand, "you've already won something important. People are talking about standing up to Tucker now, not just accepting his bullying." When the court reconvened, Judge Pierce delivered his ruling with deliberate formality. "Having considered the evidence presented, I find no basis for the claim that Sundown Ranch has violated water rights agreements," he announced. "The injunction is hereby dissolved, and Miss Vallens is free to utilize the water resources on her property according to established territory regulations." Relief washed over Stella like a physical force, but the judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore," he continued, "I am referring the matter of the attempted obstruction of these proceedings to the territorial prosecutor. Mr. Tucker, you may face criminal charges depending on what that investigation reveals." Tucker's face contorted with fury. "This is an outrage." "You haven't heard the last of this matter." "I sincerely hope I have," Judge Pierce replied sternly. "This court is adjourned." As people filed out of the courtroom, many stopped to congratulate Stella. Among them was a distinguished-looking gentleman who introduced himself as Harold Montgomery, a representative of the Santa Fe Ring, the powerful group of lawyers, businessmen, and politicians who controlled much of the territory's affairs. "Impressive performance, Miss Vallens," Montgomery said, shaking her hand. "You've made quite an impact. If you ever need assistance dealing with Tucker in the future, my associates and I would be interested in discussing a mutually beneficial arrangement." The offer was both flattering and concerning. The Santa Fe Ring was known for its influence and its corruption. "Thank you, Mr. Montgomery," Stella replied carefully, "but I prefer to maintain my independence." Montgomery smiled thinly. "As you wish. But remember, few can stand alone indefinitely in this territory." After he walked away, Dawson joined her. "Montgomery's interest suggests you've made a bigger splash than you intended." "Just what I need," Stella sighed, "trading one powerful enemy for another." "The difference is, Tucker wants to destroy you," Dawson pointed out. "Montgomery wants to use you. Neither is ideal, but one gives us more room to maneuver." Stella raised an eyebrow at his use of us, but she found she didn't mind it. Somewhere along this journey, Dawson had become essential to her plans and to her heart. They departed Santa Fe the next morning, accompanied by a territorial marshal escort arranged by Judge Pierce to ensure their safe return to Aztec. Miguel remained behind to recover from his wound, with plans to rejoin them once he was well enough to travel. The return journey passed uneventfully, giving Stella time to contemplate what awaited her. Tucker had been defeated legally, but she harbored no illusions that he would simply accept the ruling. If anything, his hatred would intensify after the public humiliation of the hearing. "What will you do now?" Dawson asked as they rode side by side, the familiar landscape of northern New Mexico territory stretching before them. "Rebuild," Stella replied simply. "Strengthen the ranch. Prepare for whatever comes next. Alone, Dawson's question held layers of meaning beyond the simple word. Stella turned to meet his gaze. "That depends on you." "I think you know where I stand," he replied, "but my job might become complicated if you align yourself with me too openly," Stella finished for him. "I understand that, Dawson. I won't ask you to choose." "I already have," he said quietly. "Some things matter more than a badge." The sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. For the first time in years, Stella allowed herself to imagine a future that included someone else, a partnership based not on dependency but on mutual respect and shared purpose. When they arrived back at the Sundown, they found the ranch hands had been busy in their absence. The barn roof had been completed, new fencing installed, and the corrals expanded. The place looked more like a working ranch than it had since Stella's arrival. "Welcome home, Miss Vallens," Jose called as they rode into the yard. "We got word you won the case." "News travels fast," Stella observed, dismounting. "Yes, the injunction has been lifted. We have our water rights secured." A small celebration ensued that evening, with the ranch hands and several neighbors gathering to mark the victory. As Stella moved among her guests, accepting congratulations and sharing the story of the hearing, she felt a new sense of belonging. These people, this land, had become her community. Dawson watched her from across the room, a quiet pride in his eyes. When the party began to wind down, he found her on the porch, gazing up at the star-filled sky. "Happy?" he asked, joining her at the railing. "Content," she corrected. "There's still much to do." "There always is," he agreed. "That's the nature of this life." Building something that matters takes time. Stella turned to face him fully. "Dawson, I need to ask you something important, something I should have asked before now." He nodded, waiting. "What happened to my uncle, the truth?" Dawson's expression grew solemn. "I believe Tucker had him killed." The evidence wasn't conclusive: a broken saddle strap that could have failed naturally, a horse that might have spooked for any reason. But the timing, just after Jeb refused Tucker's final offer. He shook his head. "I couldn't prove it, but I knew." "And now history nearly repeated itself with me," Stella said softly. "Except you're still standing," Dawson pointed out. "And Tucker's position is weakened. The territorial prosecutor will investigate the ambush, and people are watching him more closely now." "He'll try again," Stella predicted. "A man like that doesn't surrender easily." "No," Dawson agreed, "but next time he'll find you even better prepared." In the weeks that followed, Stella focused on strengthening the Sundown in every way possible. She hired additional hands, expanded the herd with quality stock purchased from ranchers eager to align themselves with the woman who had stood against Tucker, and continued the property improvements. Dawson split his time between his duties in Aztec and the Sundown, where his unofficial role as Stella's protector and advisor had evolved into something much more personal. They made no public declarations, but their growing attachment was evident to anyone who saw them together. Tucker remained ominously quiet during this period. His men avoided Sundown property, and he himself was rarely seen in Aztec. Some speculated that he was licking his wounds. Others feared he was planning something more dramatic. The answer came on a crisp autumn evening when Stella returned from inspecting the northern pasture to find a visitor waiting at the ranch house. Tucker himself, sitting alone on her porch. She approached cautiously, her hand near the pistol she now carried openly. "Mr. Tucker." "This is unexpected." "Miss Vallens," he acknowledged, rising from his chair. He looked older than when she had last seen him, the strain of recent events evident in new lines on his face. "I've come to talk business. Alone." Stella gestured for the ranch hand who had accompanied her to keep his distance but remain within sight. "Whatever you have to say can be said right here." Tucker's mouth tightened, but he nodded. "Very well. I've come to make you one final offer for the Sundown." "The ranch isn't for sale," Stella replied automatically. "Hear me out," Tucker insisted. "This isn't like my previous offers. I'm not just offering money, I'm offering peace." Stella's eyebrow raised skeptically. "Explain." "The territorial prosecutor is pressing charges over that unfortunate incident on the road to Santa Fe," Tucker said, his attempt at casualness undermined by the bitterness in his tone. "My position is precarious. A conviction would ruin me." "That's hardly my concern," Stella replied coldly. "It could be," Tucker countered, "because I'm prepared to sign over the water rights to Silver Creek, all of them, not just your portion to the Sundown, permanently and irrevocably." This caught Stella's attention. Control of the water rights would make the Sundown one of the most valuable properties in the county, ensuring its prosperity for generations. "In exchange for what?" she asked, suspicious of such generosity from a man who had tried to destroy her. "Your testimony that you can't positively identify the men who ambushed you," Tucker replied. "Without your eyewitness account, the prosecutor's case collapses." "You're asking me to perjure myself," Stella observed. Tucker shrugged. "I'm asking you to be uncertain about events that happened under stressful circumstances. People misremember details all the time. And if I refuse, then I fight the charges with every resource at my disposal," Tucker said, his voice hardening. "It could take years to resolve. During that time, accidents happen. Cattle disappear. Fires start. You've experienced some of this already, but I assure you it can get much worse." The threat was unmistakable. Tucker was offering a devil's bargain: compromise her principles for security or face ongoing warfare. "I need time to consider," Stella said finally. Tucker nodded. 24 hours. I'll return tomorrow evening for your answer." He descended the porch steps, then turned back. "One more thing, Miss Vallens. This offer is between us. Bring the marshal or anyone else into it and the deal is void." After he rode away, Stella remained on the porch, her thoughts in turmoil. Tucker's offer represented both opportunity and moral compromise. The practical part of her recognized the value of what he was offering. With the water rights secured, the Sundown would be unassailable. Yet the principle of allowing Tucker to escape justice for his crimes, including possibly her uncle's murder, was difficult to swallow. When Dawson arrived later that evening for his usual visit, he immediately sensed her distraction. "What's happened?" he asked as they sat before the fire. Despite Tucker's warning, Stella found herself telling Dawson everything. Their relationship had evolved to a point where concealment felt like betrayal. "It's a significant offer," Dawson acknowledged when she finished. "The water rights alone would make it worthwhile from a purely practical standpoint." "But," Stella prompted, hearing the reservation in his voice. "But Tucker would be getting away with attempted murder, possibly actual murder in your uncle's case," Dawson said, his face grim. "And there's no guarantee he'll honor the agreement once the charges are dropped. Men like him don't change their nature." "I've considered that," Stella admitted. "But having the water rights in writing, legally registered, would give me leverage he couldn't easily overcome." Dawson took her hands in his. "This has to be your decision, Stella. You're the one who'll have to live with it, one way or the other. But know this: whatever you decide, I'm with you." His unwavering support moved her deeply. "Even if I choose to make a deal with the man who's been your enemy for years?" "Even then," Dawson confirmed. "I believe in justice, but I also believe in you. Sometimes survival requires compromise." They talked late into the night, weighing options and consequences. By morning, Stella had made her decision. She spent the day putting certain preparations in place, consulting with Jose about specific arrangements for the ranch, and sending Charlie to town with a sealed message. By the time Tucker arrived that evening, everything was ready. "Have you made your decision, Miss Vallens?" Tucker asked as he once again took a seat on her porch. "I have," Stella replied, maintaining her composure despite the gravity of the moment. "I'll accept your offer on one condition." Tucker's eyes narrowed. "You're not in a position to set conditions." "I disagree," Stella countered smoothly. "My testimony is the key to your freedom. That gives me considerable leverage." After a moment's consideration, Tucker nodded grudgingly. "What's your condition?" "A signed confession that you arranged my uncle's death," Stella stated, watching his reaction carefully. Tucker's face flushed with anger. "That's preposterous. I had nothing to do with Jeb's accident." "Then you have nothing to lose by putting that in writing," Stella replied. "The confession will be sealed and placed in safekeeping, to be opened only if you ever move against me or the Sundown again." "Insurance," Tucker realized, his initial outrage fading into calculation. "Clever, Miss Vallens, very clever." "Do we have an agreement?" Stella pressed. Tucker considered for a long moment, weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. "Have your lawyer draw up the water rights transfer. I'll sign it along with your insurance policy once the charges are dropped." "The documents are already prepared," Stella informed him, producing a folder from beside her chair. "My condition is non-negotiable, Mr. Tucker. We conclude this business tonight or not at all." Tucker's surprise at her preparedness quickly gave way to grudging respect. He examined the water rights transfer carefully. Noting that it was indeed comprehensive, all of the Diamond T-Tickets claims to Silver Creek would pass permanently to the Sundown. The confession was equally straightforward, stating simply that Thaddeus Tucker had arranged the death of Jebediah Vallens by tampering with his saddle. It included no details that might be verified or disproven, just the bald statement of guilt. "This is blackmail," Tucker observed, though without real heat. "This is justice," Stella corrected. "The only kind available to me under the circumstances." After one final hesitation, Tucker signed both documents. Stella added her signature to the water rights transfer, then called Jose in to witness both documents. "The confession will be placed with my lawyer in Santa Fe," Stella explained. "If anything happens to me, or if the Sundown faces any further interference from you or your men, it will be delivered to the territorial governor and every newspaper from here to St. Louis." Tucker stood, his expression a mixture of anger and resignation. "You've won this round, Miss Vallens." "I underestimated you." "Many have," Stella replied simply. "I'll expect your men to remove the boundary markers along Silver Creek by the end of the week. After that, any Diamond T cattle found on Sundown water access will be considered trespassing." With a curt nod, Tucker departed. Stella watched him ride away, feeling not triumph but a complex mixture of relief and wariness. She had secured her ranch's future, but at the cost of allowing a murderer to escape formal justice. Dawson arrived shortly after Tucker left, having waited nearby as they had agreed. "It's done?" he asked, taking in her expression. "It's done," Stella confirmed, handing him the water rights document. "The Sundown now controls Silver Creek from source to county line, and Tucker's confession secured. Jose is taking it to Santa Fe tomorrow," Stella replied. She sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. "I'm not sure I did the right thing." Dawson knelt beside her. "You did what you had to do to secure your future and justice of a kind for your uncle. There's no shame in that." "What about your sense of the law?" Stella asked. "Tucker will escape prosecution for the ambush." "The law is imperfect," Dawson acknowledged. "Sometimes justice comes in unexpected forms." He took her hands in his expression serious. "Stella, there's something I need to ask you." She felt her pulse quicken at his tone. "Yes." "I've been offered the position of territorial marshal in Santa Fe," he revealed. "It would mean leaving Aztec, but it's an opportunity to do more good across the whole territory." "You should accept," Stella said immediately, though the thought of him leaving created a hollow feeling in her chest. "I will," Dawson replied, "on one condition." Stella smiled faintly at his echo of her words to Tucker. "What condition?" "That you marry me," Dawson said simply. "I love you, Stella Vallens. I have since the moment you faced down danger without flinching your first day in Aztec. You're the strongest, most determined woman I've ever known, and I want to build a life with you, whether here at the Sundown or in Santa Fe or wherever else life takes us." Tears filled Stella's eyes, not of sadness, but of a joy she had thought forever beyond her reach. "I'm still no saint," she warned, her voice catching. "I've made compromises, taken shortcuts." "Good," Dawson interrupted gently. "I need a real woman, not an angel, and you, Stella Vallens, are the realest woman I've ever known." "Then yes," she whispered, drawing him closer. "Yes, I'll marry you." Their kiss sealed more than a proposal. It marked the beginning of a partnership founded on mutual respect, shared struggle, and hard-won love. The wedding took place at the Sundown the following spring, when wildflowers carpeted the ranch's pastures and Silver Creek ran full and clear with snowmelt from the distant mountains. Judge Pierce made the journey from Santa Fe to officiate, bringing with him news that Thaddeus Tucker had sold the Diamond T and relocated to Colorado Territory, a final confirmation that Stella's gambit had succeeded. The ceremony was attended by friends and neighbors from throughout the county, many of whom had supported Stella during her struggles with Tucker. Even Mayor Wilkins made an appearance, his political instincts having guided him to align with the winning side. As Stella and Dawson exchanged vows beneath an arch of woven willow branches, the differences between them, her practical pragmatism and his principled idealism, seemed not obstacles but complements, creating a stronger whole. "I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes," Dawson vowed, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled guests. "To respect your strength and independence while offering my own." "I promise to trust you with my heart and my future," Stella replied, the words coming easily despite her usual reserve. "To build something lasting with you, wherever our path leads." Their life together unfolded in unexpected ways. Dawson accepted the territorial marshal position, establishing his office in Santa Fe while maintaining the Sundown as their primary home. Stella continued to manage the ranch, expanding its operations and reputation under the capable day-to-day supervision of Jose Ramirez, whom she promoted to foreman. Their first child, a daughter named Elizabeth, arrived the following year, followed 2 years later by a son they named Jebediah in honor of Stella's uncle. The children grew strong in the clean air and open spaces of the ranch, learning both Stella's practical resilience and Dawson's unwavering principles. As Dawson's reputation for fairness and integrity grew, he was eventually appointed territorial judge, allowing him to truly shape justice throughout New Mexico. Stella, meanwhile, became known for her innovative ranching methods and fair business practices, earning respect from former skeptics who had doubted a woman's ability to succeed in the male-dominated cattle industry. The Sundown prospered, becoming one of the territory's most successful operations. With control of Silver Creek's water, the ranch weathered droughts that devastated other properties. Stella used this advantage responsibly, allowing neighboring small ranchers fair access while maintaining the Sundown's primacy. 10 years after that fateful day when Stella had arrived in Aztec amid gunfire, she stood on the porch of the Sundown, watching her children play in the yard while Dawson discussed business with a group of ranchers who had ridden in seeking his counsel on a legal matter. The ranch had grown beyond her initial vision, now encompassing not only cattle but also horses, a small but productive orchard, and experimental dry farming techniques that were being adopted throughout the territory. The original house had been expanded to accommodate their family and frequent visitors, though Stella had insisted on preserving her uncle's study exactly as she had found it. As twilight fell and the visitors departed, Dawson joined her on the porch, slipping an arm around her waist. "Happy?" he asked, echoing the question he had posed on this same porch a decade earlier. This time, Stella didn't correct him. "Yes," she replied simply. "Deeply happy. Even though you never found the saint you thought you should be," he teased gently. Stella smiled, remembering their early conversations about her past and her flaws. "Especially because of that. You taught me that real strength isn't in being perfect, it's in being authentic, in facing the world as you truly are. And you taught me that justice isn't always found in courtrooms," Dawson acknowledged. "Sometimes it's in the life you build despite the obstacles." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink behind the mesas, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, much like the sunset they had witnessed on the day of Tucker's ultimatum. So much had changed since then, yet the essential truth remained: they had found in each other not perfection but completion, a partnership of equals that had withstood every challenge. As darkness fell and the stars emerged in the clear New Mexico sky, Stella reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a wounded, wary woman determined to stand alone, she had transformed into someone who could accept love without seeing it as weakness, who could build connections without fearing betrayal. "What are you thinking about?" Dawson asked, noting her thoughtful expression. "About how endings become beginnings," Stella replied. "My uncle's death brought me here to this land and to you. What seemed like the end of something became the start of everything that matters." Dawson nodded, understanding as he always did. "Life has a way of surprising us that way." "Indeed it does," Stella agreed, turning to look at the man who had seen beyond her defenses to the woman beneath, not a saint but a survivor, not an angel but something far more valuable. A real woman, with all the complexity and strength that entailed. The night deepened around the sundown, wrapping the ranch in peaceful darkness. Inside, the children slept soundly. The lamp burned low in Dawson's study where he worked on territorial legal briefs, and Stella moved through rooms that had become truly hers, filled with memories both bitter and sweet. She was no saint, and he was no perfect hero. They were simply two people who had found in each other the courage to face an unpredictable world together, their individual strengths creating something greater than either could have built alone. And in the end, that was better than any fairy tale ending. It was real, enduring, and entirely their own.